engagement, but you've probably covered a little bit in advance when you were doing your first assessment task. So we'll go through it, we'll have a bit of a chat, and please stop me at any particular point or raise anything that you think might be relevant to our discussion. Not much is coming up on the forums, so I've left some space aside to talk about that this morning, but mostly just technical issues with some people who are having trouble saving the audio and getting it to run. But really not much by way of content issues coming through. So I'll throw over to you and just make sure you, you know, ask any questions you may want to raise. And I began this week by saying, you know, look, even a boring sort of very, you know, one-dimensional Zoom session or PowerPoint session can be made more interesting with the content. And, you know, the whole point here is to try and engage your students. And this is the point we're raising. Instead of starting with, you know, the sage on the stage where you're up the front and, you know, saying, you know, 1, 2, 3, look at me and all these things teachers do, it's really important to throw it back to the students in some ways. And this is really what engagement is. And we're going to talk about that today. And basically just explore some of the strategies I've given you there. And, you know, they're really friendly lunch. Doing lunch with someone from history, you know, is a really great way to break the ice. It could be a sports person, it could be anyone. You know, who would they invite to talk to and explain things about their science project? You know, you can really open it up. A lot of people sort of talking about Indigenous perspectives. David Unaipon is a you know, very, very famous, very, you know, popular Australian inventor and literary agent. As you can see, he's on the $50 note. And you know, don't forget to look close to home if you are looking for some inspiration with your Indigenous stories and with your Indigenous connections to science, because there certainly are plenty of them. And as a matter of fact, the ABC released an article earlier this month where they featured, you know, the famous emu story, and they featured 3 other stories based on Indigenous sciences. So, you know, please do keep your eye peeled on the media. Really good stuff, really good connections. And we'll talk about how that can be engaging. So we've got engagement is not just about what happened in class, but it's really about what happens before students come to class. And, you know, these are some of the factors that we've got to look at as we get into this. When you're dealing with students, you know, it's what happened immediately before, what happened the night before, what happened with mum and dad that day, what happened with boyfriends, girlfriends at the older age. Anything can be a factor when it comes into the room. So it's really, really important to start from the student's point of view. So we've got a couple of action terms there, transitive words: define, list, identify, describe. And these are all things, of course, that you would cover in your peshakusha if you took on the engagement topic. So it's really important to think about that. Key terms. This week we talked about the 5 E's. And engagement really is just a state. It's an image. You know, it's a representation of what's going on inside the student. The 5 E's helps us draw that out. POE is an 8-phase model. The 5 E's help us understand what's happening in a student. When we go through a structured scaffold of events, you know, the first event being engagement, the last being evaluation. Once we've gone through those 5 steps, we as a teacher, as Vygotsky says, we should be in a better position to understand where that particular learner is at. And of course, motivation. And I'll present three versions of you here when we talk about Vygotsky. We have the sage on the stage. That's the teacher at the front of the classroom teaching a macro lesson to a large group of students. We have the meddler in the middle, the teacher walking around the classroom, engaging with students one-to-one, working on that sort of meddling model where you're disrupting their other cycles, disrupting what's happening in other parts of their lives to get them to focus on their learning. And you know, of course, we've got the sage on stage, the meddler in the middle, and then we've got the guide on the side where you sit one-to-one with the student. So I'll just plant those 3 representations with you, you know. And when you're doing your peshakusha, have a close look. You know, how would you represent those 3 identities, those 3 scholarly identities that, you know, to your students? How would you represent them? What would you be doing when you were at the front of the room? That's pretty obvious. You may have a whiteboard, you may have a blackboard, but you're at the front and the classroom real estate's pretty obvious. The meddler in the middle, you may be crouched down, you may be sitting with students in small groups at a table. Okay, the guide on the side, you may be talking to students one-to-one. Yeah, all of these different things are strategies. Gregson's text covers you know, some issues there on engagement and breaks it down into, you know, the 3 different levels, and he does that quite well. There's no point us talking about that too much unless anyone's got a particular question. And we spend a lot of time in this behavioural mode here, unfortunately. And often it can be the minority of students who are requiring us to spend the time there. When in fact, you know, the majority of the students want to get on with the learning. And we'll talk about the breakdown of classes shortly. A couple of things there. We talk about cognitive. Some people are not clear on what we mean by cognitive influences. And I really just want to point to the brain. You know, when we talk about cognition, we've got conation, which is a different term again. It talks about, that's about making wise choices. Cognition is really just about the process of your brain firing, what the brain does when you learn. And we can see here that, you know, the brain can often do its own thing. There's a really simple example there. We know that to be the cat, and yet we know it's our brain filling in the gaps. And that's just a really simple mnemonic to illustrate that. Another point I threw up this week was, you know, the left-right brain conflict. And often this will get in our way. Students sometimes just can't comprehend a concept because it's crossing that threshold between left and right brain processing. And, you know, here's a task that actually asks us to cross that threshold. And just try it yourself. I mean, you can actually see just how hard that level of enforced cognition is. And I throw that up there basically to remind you, to put you back in the position of the learner. That often when kids are encountering science, this is what they're encountering. You know, they're encountering a concept that goes against their beliefs. They're encountering a framework that they've never heard before. So, you know, all aspects of that framework that are totally unfamiliar, that are taking them out into new territories. And they're going to experience left brain, right brain conflict. And the brain, the known brain, the memory will be filling in gaps for them in spaces where they have no previous experience. So this is what we're talking about when we talk about the 5 E's, about the teacher directing that gap filling. And we've got the 5 E's up there on the right-hand side. Engage, explore. Okay, so we engage the students first of all, then we explore a concept. We may link it to them in their real world. We then deconstruct it. What does this mean? What are the small bits? What are the large bits? You know, what is the capital E? What is the small e? We start to look at explaining those bits as we deconstruct it. We look at each individual theory and we break it down. We then elaborate. We look at the real world uses or the real world applications of these particular theories. And then we evaluate. We get the students to take it back to their world where they can test it. So it's all about taking something that's unknown, deconstructing the official parts of it, explaining those in small bite-sized chunks, elaborating them, bringing them into the student's world, and then sending the student out to investigate their own world. They've deconstructed it, they've reconstructed it, and now they're taking it out by way of investigation. And 3 dot points here. Really good points. You know, all I can statements. I can do this. Now I've got this. I can build relationships through planning. I can design instruction, and I can explain assessment. You can make it active and make it engaging. So these are the tasks. This is the pathway. You know, the 5 E's is a scaffold. It's a pathway into the student's world and a pathway back out. And that's what we're looking for. Your patient curiosity should probably also be a pathway. It should demonstrate that pathway. How you as a teacher took a topic, how you broke it down, how you provided perspectives, how you step into the student's world, what it is you're doing, what they're doing, and then how you step back out. Think back to a time, and a time when, my PowerPoint didn't come up there, but think back to a time when you had a teacher, and we all have those teachers we love and teachers enjoy. And I remember, you know, I left school in year 10 and went back to high school age 19 to finish off my studies, and was really, really struggling. And, you know, I hadn't been for about a week and thought, that's it, you know, 6 weeks into the term, I'd given it up. And next, you know, I heard someone prowling around outside my house when I got home late one night. And, you know, here I am 19, so I'm sneaking out the back door thinking it was someone else. Came around the corner, and there's my year 11 coordinator poking around the house to see whether I'm home, and struck a deal with me to get back to school. And you know, for the next 13 years I was in school and higher education. So sometimes motivation, you know, it's about a teacher that you've met, someone who's made a difference. And the one thing I want to stress here is this science graffiti board. It's just a really great strategy. I've seen it work incredibly well in classrooms. You give the students a space, and, you know, one of the big problems with science, of course, is that it's taught in 30 to 60-second blocks each week, and you know, so it's not a continuous exercise. And it's really important, if we're going to engage the brain, that we engage it in a continuous exercise. And unfortunately, you know, you've got to find ways to do that, to keep information grounded in the short-term memory, so it's connecting to the working memory, And a whiteboard, a graffiti board, is a great way to do that. You know, you may have students, for instance, doing a spreadsheet activity where they're monitoring bird species or insect species, or even fruits, trees, the seasons, water quality in lakes near the school. And of course, that can all be done on a simple, common whiteboard. Gregson talks about the small E and the big E engagement, you know, and we all know this. In a class of 25 kids, you'll have about 5 of them who love being there. You know, on a good day, you'll have 10. On most days, you'll have 5. Now, that's the big E. These are the kids that love education, and it probably comes from their home. Okay, it probably stems from their home. And however, we've then got the small E engagement. And here's where Vygotsky says you'll do most of your work. Here's the domain of social constructivism. You know, you've got to create active participation. The classroom needs to be active. You know, you've got to put genuine value on learning. So you've got to have some degree of emotion in there, and you've got to make students emotionally intelligent. You know, you've got to encourage the decision making. And of course, we've got reflective involvement and deep understanding and expertise. So, you know, what we're getting students here is the 5 E's. You know, you're engaging, and then you're exploring. So that second phase, there's a lot of reflective involvement. You're working towards deep understandings, deep deconstruction of their current knowledge and their current belief systems. And then, of course, we send them away to test it. A couple of basics there. I've got a little picture of a room down the bottom here, and you know, I'm a big believer in the physical environment of the classroom. You know, I very much like the Steiner school models, where on day 1 a student builds their chair, and week 2 they make their own desk, and that chair and desk stays with them throughout their entire time at a Steiner school. You know, it's just a brilliant innovation where a student actually takes control of their classroom. But you know, here's a just a little image of a room. It's got a conversation pit, okay, where we can do the, you know, the guide on the side stuff. We've got the sage on the stage here, the desks, the whiteboard. Over here we've got the kinesthetic area, the touch and feel centres. We've got the, you know, the live library, okay, where we can, you know, the meddler in the middle. You know, leave your desk, go to the library, research this, go and have a look at this sample, describe it, write it up, analyse it. All of these different things. Anybody got a question or comment to make about classroom settings, and then whether they think they work for science or they work against them? No comments? Does anybody feel constrained when they get in a classroom to do real science? I mean, you need to get kids down and dirty to do that sort of trench learning that you really want to do. Someone says they prefer a lab. Julie, yes, prefers a lab. Again, labs can be a bit clinical too, can't they? What about outside? Taking students out in you know, out into the environment. Getting students to actually look at, you know, situated science. And for instance, a lot of maths. I used to teach in Year 9 maths in a school which no one else wanted the class, and I had 32 boys in a Year 9 maths class, and they, you know, they were a real behaviour issue. But the minute we went outside and started doing situated mathematics, they loved it. We did everything from Pythagoras. We measured the heights of trees. We even learned about racehorses and odds and statistics, and they loved it. They absolutely adored it. And they became, most of them went on actually, finish year 11 and 12, become quite good mathematicians. So yeah, there's lots of things we can do by shifting the environment and tapping into that motivation. When students are involved, okay, Martin Haberman, I introduce Haberman for you, purely to point you to someone for the future. He wrote about poverty, learners in poverty, and how to motivate kids who, when most of their life is going wrong. Haberman talked about how to get them to focus on their education, and he talks really about embedding them. And look at the context. Vital concerns. Teach them about their vital concerns, about what they're concerned about. Major concepts, big ideas, general principles, not just isolated facts. Now this sounds a lot like the Australian Curriculum in Science document, doesn't it? Yet look at the date. Habermas wrote this almost 20 years before the ACS was actually coined. Get students to be involved in planning what they're doing. Get them applying the ideas. Fairness, equity and justice. Here's the emotional content. Okay, if their life is not enjoyable, if their emotional state is not what they'd want it to be, then get them to think about how they can change the world to create better emotional states. Student engagement defined. I won't spend too much time there. I mean, I'm assuming this is a given. Students are engaged or involved, but not all students are involved or engaged. And we can look at that because there are really 5 different scaffolds here, and I want to talk a little bit about this. And if you've got any particular questions, I really want you to ask them at this point. So you're going to see this, that, you know, a student can respond in 5 different ways, and it's going to depend very much on how they feel and what's happening for them on the day. You're going to have a core of them who will be, you know, high attention, commitment and high tasks all the time. They're going to be highly motivated. You're going to have some who are likely to come with you in a follow the leader's format. You know, you're the platoon leader, you're the sage on the stage, you're the meddler in the middle, and you can win them over with a little bit of, you know, constructivist teaching. You've got others who you are not going to actually reach very much at all. Low attention, low commitment to the task at hand. However, they will actually complete the work, maybe because there's a test, maybe because it's a parent-teacher night, maybe because, you know, it's the easiest thing to do, the path of least resistance. You've got kids who'll retreat. And in the lecture on Monday or Tuesday, I talked about the work of EDSE12040. And Wenger's a brilliant researcher who actually raises this notion of identities of participation and identities of non-participation. And he would say these kids down here, the retreats and the rebellions, are working just as hard at non-participation as your participating students here are at participation. So it's really, really, you know, try to think of it this way. Kids who are rebelling are actually working just as hard as kids who are highly engaged. They're having to come up with the emotional, the cognitive and the behavioural statements to reflect where they are as a learner. We can go on. What does it look like? So again, for the Peshakusha, I mean, you know, I could have put images here, but it's much easier just to put words because it cuts to the quick. An engaged student, as you can see, is on a continuum. Create, evaluate, analyse, apply, understand, and remember. So they're working through Bloom's wonderful cognitive taxonomy. There it is, right through to long-term memory. So, you know, as we go through some of the quotes, you know, we went Tao Tzu, we talked about, you know, I do, I understand. We can look at all of these different ideas here. Students are creating, they're evaluating, analysing, and they're committing it to long-term memory. Someone who's strategically compliant, okay, that is who's going with the platoon leader, okay, is actually getting down to the recall stage and sometimes to the remember stage. They could be high-achieving students, but, you know, biggest example that comes here, of course, is students who are very good at sports and also very good or very good at academic subjects. They tend to go along with one because it supports the other, okay? So they can be strategically compliant. Someone who's ritually compliant, as you can see, goes through all of these stages as well. They're reaching understanding, but because of the nature of their engagement, it's more likely to result in just recall or short-term memory. So here you have a student, for instance, you know, probably your C to B students who will be able to perform, who will be able to recall facts, who will be able to analyse processes, but it's all short-term memory. Test them again in 6 weeks or 8 weeks and you'll generally find it's gone. The retreatist actually learns little, full of negative attitudes and can just disengage or disrupt, and you'll often see the person who retreats because they're passive disengagers. Okay, they'll find strategies to avoid and hide. The rebels, however, are quite active disruptors and they're working very, very hard. The rebel works just as hard as the engaged student in your classroom. So here's the challenge. How do you turn the rebel around? Yeah, that is the challenge. Factors affecting engagement. Gregson talks about those in quite some good detail. There's no need for me to repeat what Gregson talks about here. But often with the rebels, I find the best strategy is down here in community. Some people actually advocate parents, get the parent involved, get the whole school involved, but then that simply results in the students shifting more to the right, where they actually start to then disengage, not just with the classroom, not just with you as a teacher, but with the whole school, and ultimately with their parents. The community, I find, by far, is the most impactful strategy for dealing with students who are rebellious. And that means taking them out, connecting to the real world, bringing speakers in, okay, changing the situation, mixing it up, making the world the focus of their learning rather than the academic curriculum. Any questions or comments on that? Anybody had an experience where they've done that? Very quiet this morning. That's okay, we'll keep going. So what are they doing? I point here to the Australian curriculum, and again, the Noongar seasons, just throwing this in from WA, as you can see, the Noongar people over there. Different ways of learning, different perspectives. And as you can see, we're talking here again about the complementary nature of science. And the reason why I raise this, of course, is we can, always jumps, we can look at different engagement strategies. And that means making connections to the lessons, you know, and there's different ways you can do that. Get students in, use what we call the kinesthetic hook. Now, it's really important to do that. Now, a little example we gave you this week was where we used the emu story and just set it up, you know, for instance, as a Socratic dialogue. You can take a class, for instance, and we can look at Orion's belt. Now, there's a rich history in astronomy about Orion's belt. The stories, the representations, some of the great explorers. You could spend a long time on the story behind the story here. And then there's a different perspective, the Great Emu story. Now, on last calculations, there is not one single Australian Aboriginal grouping that does not have its own version of the emu story. Okay, now you can see the similarities. Split your class in half. Get one to research Orion. Get the other to look at the emu story. Have a before, a during and after. Bring them together and you can see both cultures informing and expanding the science. Now I've thrown that up there for you as a little model. It's probably something you're doing. If it's not, think about it. It's a good strategy. And note the key here, arrange the room. During the discussions and during the research, get out of the way. Okay, afterwards, okay, go back. Have students reflect. What went well? What did they understand? What are the important points of these two complementary scientific understandings? You had a task too. We've got Confucius there and Benjamin Franklin to help frame that. Yeah, fairly straightforward. What are the do's and what are the don'ts? Okay, you know, I don't generally like that approach because I do believe in low engagement curriculum or pedagogy and high engagement pedagogy. For instance, you can't have students, you know, on the ceiling all the time in high engagement pedagogy because cognitively not all of them are going to be able to cope with it. So you've actually got to go to low-level pedagogy sometimes where you do become the sage at the stage, where you stand at the front and you will deliver a lesson or you'll teach concepts. Okay, and then you can actually, from that point, you can then go forward to some of your high, more productive pedagogies of touch, feel, experiment, all those kinds of things. So don't write off the role of, you know, teaching at the front of the room. Okay, but bear in mind, you can augment that, you can supplement that, so that you can actually have students interacting with that. And I'll give you a couple of strategies on how to do that. So don't be frightened of assuming the role of the teacher, but just assume it, move into it, but do it in a way that you're conscious of your 5 E's. And the reason why I say that is, you know, going back to the memory and the brain, it's very easy for us as teachers to get up there and actually start panicking about ourselves. We can become a little bit narcissistic. Is this a good lesson? Is it going well? Are they understanding my message? Well, get out of the road. It's not your message. Okay, it's actually their message. You've got to go back and work from their point of view. Their brain is not a function of an audio-visual tape recorder. It's just not going to be a mini you. Okay, they're actually going to have their own understandings. Some of it will come in and some won't. We talked about the amygdala on Tuesday. The little crap detector inside your brain sits just below the hypothalamus. And it detects all the information that comes in and it will retain what you want and it discards what you don't want. And I used the example of some phone numbers at a nightclub to generate that. But it's asking 3 basic questions. Have I heard or seen this information before? Yes? Okay, if the answer is yes, then it goes to its memory. And it runs it down the neural pathway and it retrieves the memory it's got or retrieves the familiarity, even if it's wrong. And this is why we go in with the 5 E's. We engage and we explore. Because even if they have a pre-existing understanding, our goal in science is to test that. Is the information new? Yes, it is. Okay, where does it fit in? What can I do with it? So this is why we go back and we talk about the previous lessons or we talk about existing scientific principles or theories. Because the first thing, you know, traditional societies do is they go back to elder stories. But everybody in our society wants to wow the world. You know, everybody wants to write the new song. Everybody wants the big hit, something new and innovative. Actually, really good teaching goes backwards in time. It goes backwards to our principles, to our elder world. And where does this information fit in? If it doesn't fit in, if it's new, okay, we need to create the structure for where it belongs. Can I assume it's the same idea I had yesterday or last month? And there we have the closing, the evaluation, the 5 E's. And again, I keep trying to bring back to this notion of the brain. We collect information, we acquire it from stimulus in the environment. We process it and we keep what we want, we rehearse it, we jettison what we don't. The brain does that itself. We're able to retain stuff. We keep it by running it through our working memory, and we're able to retrieve it and use it by storing it in our long-term memory. And these processes, as you can see here, take different periods of time. Our sensory awareness is instant. We can acquire something. For instance, you can be at a shopping centre and see a mother hit a child, and instantly you've formed an opinion. You have an emotional and cognitive reaction to that incident, and you may even have a behavioural one where you turn and walk around the other way, or your behaviour may cause you to confront the woman and actually suggest that what she's doing is not okay. So we can see all of these different things. And then our working memory, you know, it'd be based on something you may have done before or beliefs you currently held or how you are feeling if you're agitated. And of course, our long-term memory, hours to lifetime. Think about those models when you're thinking about your students, because it then helps us come up with engagement strategies. These ones are fairly well dealt with, I think generally throughout Gregson and in other resources you have, and you're probably using most of them in your teaching now. Graphic organisers, time sequence maps, you can look at the evolution of a scientific principle. Cause-effect maps, very, very good for physical sciences. Description maps, very, very good for environmental sciences, earth sciences. Concept maps, really, really good for laying out the understanding of where you're taking a group of students, for previewing or signposting what you're going to be doing. Barriers to engagement, again, I won't talk too much about those. You're probably quite aware of it and experience it in your students' own reaction to science. The biggest one I think here is the timetable, unfortunately. I think science lives in impulse, science lives in spontaneity, but if you're giving it 30 to 60 minutes a week every day on Wednesday, and that's the only thing that happens on that Wednesday, you'll actually start to see your disengaging and avoidant students not be there on Wednesday, so they're not getting any science for a whole week. Now, clearly, we've got to address that in our classroom, and we really must find out better ways of teaching science and getting it away from the grasp of the administration of the school and actually setting it into the minds of the students so it's a living, functioning thing. The elements of good teaching, again, Gregson does this quite well. Okay, there's not much point in me going through this obvious information unless somebody has a particular question they would like to ask. These are all good, of course, for the Paishakusha. If you're doing the engagement topic, it may give you a little more fodder to actually look at. But certainly, you are going to want to cover engagement in at least one of your slides for any topic that you do. Planning a lesson. The research actually demonstrates that learning improves when the students are asked to do something, to actually do something when they are moving and thinking at the same time. Now, we know that, for instance, from the field of psychology and therapeutic treatments, we're seeing a whole emergence in touch therapies. I don't mean massage and things. I actually mean people going through trauma counselling where they're actually engaged in moving different parts of their bodies. Okay, where, for instance, people are being taken back through traumatic events and they're required to follow a finger or a hand or an eye so that the body is moving. Okay, it's opening and reprogramming the brain, and the ultimate reprogramming of the brain supports learning. And this is what we call neuroplasticity, and this is what people like Mark Prensky write about in great depth and detail. So when you're planning a lesson, for God's sake, do something. Start off by, you may be the second lesson in a sequence. Get students to state the information in their own words. What did we do last time? Write it down. Okay. If you don't want to write it down, put it on a response card. Okay. Some students are afraid of being wrong. Put it on a response card, hand it in. You can go through them all. Put the ones that are in one pile, separate them on different piles. Ask the students why you may be separating the cards. What do they have in common? What are different? Get them going. Have some partner discussions. See connections between, for instance, your earth science. You may be looking, for instance, at geology or some rock formation. Get some connections between it and other parts of the course you've done. Have an open discussion. Polling. You can even do this. There's a wonderful piece of software called Socratic. Now, you can use it with students on their mobile phone. You set up a station in Socratic, and you can actually send students questions, and students dial into the station, and they can do multiple choice voting. So you can put that on a whiteboard, or you can put that run it through your computer, and they get a live snapshot of what people are saying in the classroom at any given point of time. Polling, short surveys, very good. Whip arounds, give examples of things. Bring them in if you can. Okay? Recognise your concept in guises and circumstances. Panels and fishbowls, teams of 2 to 4, always good. Put them in teams, walk around, then you're the meddler in the middle. You can sit down with the teams and stimulate them. Make it based on birthdays. That way they've got something in common. Think of an application, okay, that you take this principle and apply it to the real world. And some other ideas. Okay, think about how you can get students involved when you're doing that planning the lesson. And I do encourage you to do that task, because you are going to need to have some science lessons when you go out, pre-made ones. And it doesn't matter what the topic is. If you've got your strategies done and organised, you're 3/4 of the way towards having a really, really good science lesson. That's my slideshow for the week. Does anybody have any questions they want to ask, either about the engagement slideshow, about the Paishakusha, or about any of the issues that have come up during the week on the forum, which have seemed to be mostly technical related to assessment task 1? Throwing over to you, please. Any questions?
Hi, Colin.
Fiona, how are you?
I'm good. I'm one of those with a technical issue. I did post on the forums about it, just saying that when I played back the slideshow, it was cutting off a couple of seconds of each voice recording.
Yep.
When I play them individually, though, in like the actual designing page, not the slideshow, just the normal slideshow, slides,
yep.
They do play okay. I worked around it with the slideshow by adding another couple of seconds to each slide, and I'm just wondering, is this going to penalise me? Like, are you going to be able to see that I haven't actually done over 20 seconds of talking? It's just I've had to add that so that it doesn't cut me off.
Look, you will probably hear me clapping, Fiona, that you've actually come up with a solution to what would be a difficult situation. So, no, you won't be penalised, and I won't be sitting there with a stopwatch.
Oh, good.
But for instance, someone who adds additional slides, I mean, I'd have to call people on that, because that's kind of unfair advantage. But if you're sticking to your 2020 and it's approximately 2020, you'll go under in some slides, you may go over in others. So in the end, it's about the wash-up, and, no, it's not an issue. There is a slide transition tool for when you're saving as a PPX, where you can actually shorten or speed up the transition process, because often it's the transition process that gets in the way of the audio. It's not the actual audio itself.
Yeah, it was the transition, and I just added a couple of seconds onto the transition part, and that seemed to do the trick with not cutting it off. But then it makes each slide look like they go for longer than 20 seconds, that's all, and I was just a bit worried about that.
No, I'm much more concerned with your content and your interpretation, Fiona, than the 21 or 22 seconds.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Any other questions? Can I ask how people are travelling at the moment? Is it all making sense? Is the course useful to you as potential teachers of science? No comments? Be honest. It's fine. I mean, if there's things that we can change or improve, or if we can put an emphasis on something more for you over the remaining 6 weeks, we're more than happy to do that. But we, if you feed it back, we can make changes and we can adjust things to ensure that you're getting what you need. because you're the people who will be out there and naked with science teaching in the very near future. So it's, it's really in our interest to support you as much as possible. So if you do think of anything, please throw it forward. That there's no punishment, all advice is welcome. And I've inherited this course from someone else, so there's a few things I would change. So I'd be welcome your opinion as well. So please feel free. Right, thank you, Julie. Yeah, it's great. Julie just writes in the chat that she's enjoyed the engagement task. Yeah, so it's really important if you can, where possible, I'll gear the course over the remaining 6 weeks more towards applied science teaching, and you'll probably notice that next week we move into, we've got three sub-strands to cover, Earth, biology and space science. We're basically doing 2 weeks on each, which is not much. So what we're going to try and do is try and have as many examples as possible that you can take away and actually start generating some of your own lesson plans and your own lesson resources, so that you've got things to run with when you get out into schools. All right, if there's no further comments, and I appreciate that too, Fiona, thank you. If there's no further comments, please make sure you use the Q&A, get things going. I know this week was a short one, and it's sort of attached onto the assessment task, so people have got their heads down and tails up. But please, if you are having any troubles, please get straight into me, put it on the Q&A, send me an email, and certainly we'll do what we can. All right, have a good week. And I think next week we've got Anzac Week, and the following week after that we've got Labour Day here in Queensland. So we've got a couple of short weeks coming up, so it's an excellent chance to